So I've lived with my grandfather most of my life. I didn't have like a traditional parent relationship. I didn't have the dad. I had a mum, but I lived with my grandfather. So that's kind of what I was used to.
Yeah. Any particular reason why you couldn't stay with your mum?
So my mum had me and my brother and also my sister, but because of financial issues, it just had to be a scenario where we were separated. I went and lived with my grandfather, and he took me to the Caribbean with him.
Yeah. What was it like, obviously not having your dad around, but then also knowing your mum was around, but you just couldn't live with her?
Do you know what it is? If I'm honest, I feel like where I went with my grandfather at a really young age, back then it wasn't something I really thought about. I just knew my grandfather to be my primary carer, you know? And what I will say is when I grew up in the Caribbean, a lot of people I went to school with, a lot of people had like the traditional family dynamic. So I used to see like moms and dads, and they were all like a low age range. So me growing up, it was always a thing where I knew my grandfather wasn't going to be in my life when I needed it the most, or for as long as other people were blessed to have their parents, you know? So in that sense, it was scary, and it was challenging, because even like I always said to my grandfather, like, I don't know what I'd do in life without you, because like you're the only person I'm used to having around me, you know? And like, even in saying that, I even said to him, yeah, which is crazy, I was like to him, when you die, I want to die too, because I don't know where my place would be in the world when you're not around, you know?
Is your granddad still with us today?
No. Yeah.
So talk to me about the moment when you found out he had passed.
Yeah, past. So around my grandfather's passing, so when I lived in the Caribbean, it was primarily me and him. That was the dynamic I was used to. The story around him passing is actually quite sad, because where it was me and him alone in the house, I was kind of responsible for taking care of him, and I was only like 11, 12. He was unwell for a period of weeks. He was vomiting, he was weak, he was quite feeble. And as a kid, I was like 11, 12. I didn't really know what was going on. I used to kind of do my best to help him in the way I knew best. So at night, I kind of used to sleep on the floor next to his bed, just because I didn't want to go to sleep in my room and wake up and something's happened, you know, or not been there to help him when maybe I could have done something. Not sure what I could have done, but I'd rather be there, you know, and it kind of was like that. So we went to the hospital, got checked out, but where healthcare isn't the best there, and unless you're important, a person of importance, they're not really gonna dive deep into what's actually going on, you know? They just dismissed it, gave him some tablets and left it at that. So this has been going on for weeks. His brother came over, his brother said, something's not right, let's take you back to the hospital because it doesn't feel right. We've now gone back to the hospital, and with a proper examination, they found out he's got bowel cancer. Hearing the word cancer is, at that age, I never really understood what it was anyways, but I just knew it was something big, you know? And then he had to kind of get checked into hospital. During that time, it was hard because I've still got to carry on with life. I've got to navigate going to school, doing all these things by myself, and I lived with my grandfather, so it's only me. I've got to navigate to getting into like town, going to school, coming back, feed myself, stuff like that. Eventually, family did come over, but it's not the same as like when your carer's not there, you know. And most of my time was spent going back and forth from hospital, seeing if he's okay. Day trips in hospital, spending hours in hospital. I had exams at school, and I actually failed my exams. And if I didn't, maybe I would have went up to the next year. But with everything going on, it was impossible to fixate on that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That whole experience of him being in hospital was pretty traumatizing, because in those countries, it's not as it is here. You see things you probably shouldn't see. Decapitation, people throwing up blood and all kind of stuff like that. So I kind of had to see all of that at a young age. And as well as seeing my grandfather amongst these people, not knowing what's going to happen to him. And yeah, and all my family were here in the UK. No one was really over there. Eventually, that time passed. There's lots of other things that happened in between that, but it's not really worth diving into. Family came over. He went into surgery, and that was probably one of the most scariest points in my life because you don't know what to expect from that. When someone goes into surgery, they're either gonna come out with good news, it's a success, blah blah blah, or we're sorry they passed. You know, so we stood outside the ER, yeah, for a couple of hours. They came out. They said we managed to remove the tumor, but he's gonna need proper intensive care now. During that period of time, I'm also seeing his looks, his physique, everything degrade because he's not eating, he's in hospital, he's suffering, you know? And that was probably a really pivotal point in my life because from the Caribbean, that's when I had to come to the UK. There wasn't much of a choice in it because we needed the better healthcare, you know? So I was like turning 12 probably, 13 maybe. And I had to leave everything behind, like all my friends, everything I was used to, kind of start a new life here in the UK. That was probably the biggest change for me. I kind of came to the UK not knowing what to expect. And I'd been to the UK here and there, like maybe once a year, twice a year to visit family. Yeah. But living here and being amongst the culture was very different. It's very different from just visiting, you know? When I came to the UK now, I grew up in a predominantly Asian area. So where I'm coming from, the Caribbean, I'm used to being around just blacks. It was a culture shock. Going into a predominantly Asian school as well, I experienced lots of things from racism, abuse, emotional abuse, things along the lines of that, as well as navigating my grandfather dying from cancer. So school was a pretty hard adjustment to make, as well as kind of trying to have a normal home life.
Talk to me about the impact that it had on you mentally, obviously losing your granddad, but then also trying to just navigate this new environment that you're just not comfortable in.
Mentally, I feel like I powered through a lot of things in a sense of my whole school period, as much as I was being bullied and racially and for other reasons and stuff as well. I had this mentality of, I had so much things happen to me in life, I just had to get on with things, you know? And there was no good in complaining because it doesn't change anything. It was hard because my grandfather, even when I was in school, I had to go to UCLH, that's in like Houston, to his chemo sessions, help him at home, like taking the drips, and I had to do that whilst also focusing on school and trying to get used to being in the UK, trying to have friends and stuff. So I had to navigate that. But I kind of just powered through it. It was a thing where I never had a point in my life something wasn't going on. So I never thought about it. I just had to get on with things, you know? And that mentality stayed with me a lot in my life until later on where I actually started to reflect. Do you know what? I have a lot of trauma that I need to deal with. But before that, it was just get on with things. There's no point complaining. Life is life, get on with it, you know? Before that, that was kind of my mentality with a lot of things. And what I will say as well, with all of that going on, I'm also trying to reconnect with my family who I'm not used to. Like my mum, for example, I'm building a bond with my mum at such a late point in my life, you know? And I'm losing the person who was my mum and my dad at the same time. So yeah, it was a challenging time to say the least, you know? Yeah. One thing I learned in life, especially at this point, is a lot of the stuff I've been through, because it was so normal and I've accepted it, my way of thinking was tailored based on that. When I've actually dove into things now and realized, you know, that this wasn't normal, this wasn't right, and the way I've coped with that wasn't healthy. It's made me realize this is what I need to do to fix that. Do you know what I mean? And until you're able to do that, there isn't no healing in a lot of situations, you know?